Good evening, you're watching World News Tonight on TVP World. I'm Aaron Darman. Europe is facing the fallout tonight of this explosive security roadmap released by the Donald Trump White House that claims the continent is on the brink of civilizational collapse and effectively rules out the growth of the NATO alliance. We'll have extensive coverage of this developing story in just a moment, but first, the latest headlines. Paris pushes for stronger trade ties between Beijing and the European Union. Andrej Babiš is granted the green light to return as Czech Prime Minister. And Poland's parliament goes behind closed doors to talk state security. But we begin tonight with a bombshell report out of Washington in which the Donald Trump administration warns of civilizational erasure, rallies Europe's far right, and appears to dramatically assume global decision-making powers. In fact, the document harks back to the 19th century Monroe Doctrine that warned against interference in America's backyard. Defence correspondent Zuzana Jurek explains.
Great power politics are back, at least according to the freshly published US National Security Strategy. The document is driven by the 19th century Monroe Doctrine, which warned global powers against interference in America's backyard, the Western Hemisphere. And it sends a message to smaller countries. Be prepared for mightier neighbors, that is America, China and Russia, to make decisions above your heads. At the same time, the document rejects the strategy of promoting globalization, which allowed European and Asian allies to take advantage of American economic and military power. On the NATO alliance, the document appears less clear, mirroring Russia's rejection of the bloc accepting new members.
This is a departure from a long tradition of keeping NATO's door open to candidates who meet the criteria. Trump is sort of following the Russian narrative that whatever security arrangements come out of the current war in Ukraine, NATO has to pledge no expansion policy.
Ukrainians see this as going against their national self-determination.
Ukrainian membership in NATO is the key goal of our foreign policy. It is in our constitution, and no one could put us aside from this track.
Washington, however, is happy to maintain relations with Central Eastern Europe, particularly the Visegrad Four, as long as they keep money flowing for the US military-industrial base.
For US, Europe still is perceived as a very important place to make a business. It means that the US accepts the current situation, the NATO, the existence of NATO, and US has its interest to have very strong relations with these countries.
Poland, with its near 5% GDP defense spending, a pipeline of purchases from the US, from the Abrams tanks to F-35 fighter jets, continues to be hailed a model ally by many in the Trump administration, including the new US ambassador to Warsaw.
In a new era full of challenges, strengthening Poland is part of the America First doctrine.
But though Trump's administration says yes to Poland, Warsaw remains skeptical.
The timing of the announcement that the United States would not expand NATO is tied to the talks that took place in Russia between Witkoff and Kushner on one side and Putin and Ushakov on the other. This is apparently the result of an agreement between the American and Russian delegations.
In contrast to the Visegrad Four, however, the rest of Europe has been slammed by the agenda. The document blames multiculturalism and multilateralism for the continent's alleged civilizational and economic decline, going as far as to claim that migration will soon mean that NATO alliance will no longer be European and North American at its core. And what did Europe have to say on all of this? Absolutely nothing.
I will not tell you exactly when, but we will obviously look into it, given the importance of this document, and we have received some requests, so we'll get back to you as soon as we have a clear position.
For TVP World, Zuzana Jurek.
And joining me in the studio is Kazimierz Szwajek, who's been combing through the 33-page security strategy. Good evening, Kazimierz. So how different is this plan from the Joe Biden administration and even Donald Trump's first term?
Good evening, Aaron. The difference is massive. This could potentially be one of the biggest criticisms of Europe to ever be put on an official US document. So let's jump straight into it. Let's compare it to a document of same kind, but from the predecessor of Donald Trump, Joe Biden, from 2022. So when it comes to Europe, Donald Trump this year sees Europe as weak, as misguided. This is clear from numerous points in this document. He says that Europe is facing a stark prospect of civilizational erasure, and that the US should be cultivating resistance to Europe's current trajectory within European nations, very much presenting the US as the country which should be guiding Europe to some kind of direction. When we compare it to Joe Biden, this is a massive difference, as Joe Biden viewed Europe as an equal partner, an ally. He said that Europe has been and will continue to be the foundational partner for the United States when it comes to facing global challenges. Now, when it comes to Russia, Donald Trump in 2025 sees Russia as having strategic potential. He says it's in the core interest of the United States to re-establish strategic stability with Russia, and that Europe should do the same. Meanwhile, Joe Biden viewed Russia as an existential threat in 2022. This is just after the start of the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine. And really, when you look through these documents, all you have to do to see the shift in focus is just look at how many times the word Russia appears in both documents. In the document from 2025 from Donald Trump, the National Security Strategy, the word Russia appears only 10 times, whereas in Joe Biden's document, the word appears 71 times. So a huge, huge difference in focus when it comes to Russia and its relations with the United States. Now, when it comes to NATO, Donald Trump views it as problematic nowadays. He says that the United States should end the perception and prevent the reality of NATO as a perpetually expanding alliance. Now, the word expanding is also curious here, as really, this is also mirroring the narrative of the Kremlin, which says that NATO is expanding, whereas the alliance is actually enlarging. There is an enlargement of NATO, meaning that countries are willingly joining the alliance. There is no actual forceful expansion of NATO. When it comes to Joe Biden, he saw NATO as stronger together. He praised the fact that Finland and Sweden joined NATO in the last 2 years. But, okay, we have Democratic President Joe Biden, we have Republican President Donald Trump, so you could say that there is no surprise that there is such big difference. But let's actually compare Donald Trump to Donald Trump. Let's see how the same document written by Donald Trump in 2017 compares to the one that he has presented us with nowadays. We can see that when it comes to Europe, Donald Trump in 2017 viewed it as a vital partner, aspiring partner of the United States. When it comes to Russia, he viewed it as an adversary, not as a strategic partner. He said here, and I quote, that Russia is using subversive measures to weaken the credibility of America's commitment to Europe, standing between America and Europe. But now this divide is seeming bigger and bigger, and it's also on the part of Donald Trump. Now, when it comes to NATO, in 2017, Donald Trump saw NATO as an important alliance which adhered to the rule of crucial common defense. In 2017, in the National Security Strategy, Donald Trump mentions Article 5 of the Washington Treaty, meaning that an attack against one is an attack against all, a crucial NATO rule. There is no such mention of Article 5 in the document from 2025. So really, the difference in the documents between 2025 and 2017, written by the same people, Donald Trump, by the same person, rather, Donald Trump, is really massive. For now, let's go back to the table with Aaron Daman.
Kazimierz Wyszek, thank you very much for your analysis. Now, as the diplomatic back and forth over Ukraine continues, Russia is again ramping up its attacks on the war-torn country's civilians. And as Pavel Chaskovsky reports, America's redefined security posture may only distance Kyiv further from Washington.
As Russia claims to have taken Pokrovsk, Ukraine's frontier fortress city, neighboring Myrnohrad is becoming encircled whilst being heavily shelled.
As of now, all our fighters can do, and all they do, is hold the city as best they can, exerting absolutely inhuman, titanic efforts.
And Ukrainian civilians are being terrorized as strikes on cities do not abate.
We covered ourselves, cried and prayed.
In recent weeks, Russia has been clearly intensifying pressure on Ukraine.
We are being bombarded every single day and night. Russia keeps pushing us at the battlefield.
It is a double bind for Ukraine, as the peace talks, which sometimes get downgraded to just ceasefire talks, do not go Kyiv's way. First, there was the infamous 28-point peace plan that included vast concessions to Russia. And then, after much diplomatic work was put into reshaping the plan to allow Ukraine some wiggle room, US envoys arrived in Moscow for talks with Putin. Although the meeting yielded few tangible results, Donald Trump's hope in Russia wanting peace seems to have rekindled.
And you spoke with Mr. Witkoff and with Mr. Kushner
last night.
Did they give you the sense that President Putin still wants to end the war, wants to make peace?
He would like to end the war.
Trump's view could not be more different from that of the Ukrainians.
I do not believe that Russia will be ready to any real ceasefire unless there would be a pressure that will be done by many leaders at the same time.
This need for support from many leaders was one of the reasons why French President Emmanuel Macron met with his Chinese counterpart, lobbying for Beijing's backing to end the war. But given the recently released US national security strategy that essentially leaves Europe to fend for itself, it seems that the US will also need to be convinced again.
Unity between Americans and Europeans on the Ukrainian issue is essential, and I say it again and again, we need to work together.
In Miami, Ukrainian delegation is to hold another round of talks with Kushner and Witkoff, a meeting that might eventually bring the war half an inch closer to ending. But according to some, not the way Ukraine would want it.
There is a possibility that a peace is good, bad or a compromise, and I think this peace eventually will be a compromise.
Paweł Trzaskowski for TVP World.
Czech billionaire Andrej Babiš has agreed to put his agrochemical company in an independent trust, paving the way for him to return as the country's Prime Minister next week. The Eurosceptic Babiš, whose ANO party came out on top in October's parliamentary election, had been blocked from assuming the job by President Petr Pavel over the conflict of interest. Our correspondent Andrew Sweeney reports from Prague.
The news that Andrej Babiš would be relinquishing his control of Agrofert, one of the largest companies in the Czech Republic, brings to an end a stalemate between himself and President Petr Pavel. On December 4th, Babiš published a video on his social media accounts where he announced he would be divesting himself of the company, passing it into a trust to be inherited by his children on the event of his death.
I have decided to irrevocably give up Agrofert, with which I will no longer have anything to do. I will never own it again. I will not have any economic relations with it, and I will not be in any contact with it. This is an irreversible solution. My children will only acquire Agrofert after my death.
Reacting to the news, President Pavel said he welcomed Babiš's decision to relinquish Agrofert and that he would approve his nomination as Prime Minister on December 9th.
I appreciate the clear and understandable manner in which Andrej Babiš fulfilled our agreement and publicly announced a way of resolving his conflict of interest. Therefore, I have decided to appoint him to the position of Prime Minister on Tuesday, December 9th at 9 o'clock. In doing so, I respect the results of the elections to the Chamber of Deputies of Parliament.
With Babiš's nomination now being accepted by President Pavel, the formation of a new government can begin in earnest. However, while it is no longer a political case, according to Jan Chilik, Professor of Czech Studies at Glasgow University, questions remain about the conflict of interest surrounding Agrofert.
It is not clear, I repeat, whether this blind trust or whatever it is where he's put up Agrofert is going to be giving dividends to Babiš.
One person in particular who may welcome the acceptance of Andrej Babiš as Prime Minister is American President Donald Trump. On December 5th, the White House published a new security policy for the United States, which criticised many European countries, but singled out the countries of Central Europe for particular praise.
We want to work with aligned countries that want to restore their former greatness. Our broad policy for Europe should prioritize building up the healthy nations of Central, Eastern and Southern Europe through commercial ties, weapon sales, political collaboration and cultural and educational exchanges.
As for the next steps in the formation of the Czech government, President Pavel will meet with each nominee for each ministry and evaluate them. He has the right to either reject or accept for nomination. For TVP World in Prague, Andrej Sweeney.
Welcome to the Chamber of Secrets. Polish lawmakers have held urgent talks behind closed doors over cryptocurrency-related security issues, TVP World has learned. It comes after right-wing Polish President Karol Nawrocki vetoed a bill to regulate the virtual currency market earlier this week. Piotr Miszczuk has more.
Without their mobile phones and even without their pens, only with their voting cards, Polish MPs took part in a closed-door parliamentary session early on Friday. And while the topic was secret and some MPs didn't want to tell us anything about the details of the meeting, others did spill some beans.
Discussion was secret, and nothing which was said in the chamber can be disclosed outside.
We discussed the safety and security of Poles, including safety related to investing, financial instruments and the risks connected with them. The session mainly concerned the president's veto of the bill on cryptocurrencies.
It is believed that during the session, Prime Minister Tusk shared some details about a Russian criminal group operating in Poland and one that is financed by cryptocurrencies.
We are dealing with very dangerous phenomena. Russian money is present, the mafia is present, and these aren't figments of my imagination, but the fruit of various operations and investigations. And the money coming from those environments, which are very dangerous for Poland, was also used for political and organizational promotion.
But media reports say that the session aimed to convince opposition MPs to help reject the presidential veto. But the opposition MPs I spoke to were rather unconvinced, and they said that closing the doors on the meeting was completely unnecessary.
I may only smile about what Prime Minister Tusk is doing with the parliament. He is making the parliament his PR vehicle to launch political subjects, not important issues regarding Polish security.
We voted in favor of this bill, and we will vote to overturn the veto. But what happened today with the closed-door session was a political farce, completely unjustified by anything that was said there.
In order to dismiss President Nawrocki's veto, the ruling coalition needed 60% of votes in favor, but Prime Minister Tusk failed to garner enough support to do it. For TVP World from the Polish Parliament, I'm Piotr Miszczuk.
And joining me now for an exclusive interview is Galenda Nehus, former NATO Deputy Director for Defence and Security Cooperation. Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening.
So 33 pages, all in the name of national security. Is this the Donald Trump White House putting on paper what we already know, that America is giving up on Europe?
To a large extent, I think it confirms what we have been hearing before. So I think in a nutshell, that paper is bad news for Europe, bad news for Ukraine, very mixed news for NATO, but at the same time, it's very good news for the populist right-wingers in some of our countries, and it's even better news for Russia.
And let's talk about that in just a moment, because as we go to air tonight, reports are also emerging of US officials briefing that they want Europe to take over the bulk of NATO's defence efforts by 2027. That includes intelligence and missiles. Is Europe ready to take on that burden, especially as far as I could see that this new strategy doesn't even seem to use the words Article 5, this clause that says an attack on one is an attack on all?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, the reference to Article 5 is not there. I mean, when it comes to NATO, apart from referencing again that free riding is no longer acceptable, and insisting that allies now also deliver on the 5% pledge of investing in defense. What is most harmful, clearly, is that it basically seeks to revoke NATO's open door policy for eventual membership of other countries. And this open door policy, I mean, that's enshrined in the alliance founding treaty. So it's nothing which is a little petitesse. I mean, it's really one of the cores of the alliance. And that's something this strategy puts into question, because it refers to that there should not be there needs to be an end to the perception and preventing the reality of NATO as a perpetually expanding alliance. Already the term expanding alliance is actually Russian terminology. I mean, NATO talks about enlargement. So in that sense, it's very mixed news for NATO. But clearly, I mean, Trump's skepticism or outright opposition to multilateralism, be this in NATO or the EU, that we have seen before on display.
When it comes to what you mentioned there about not wanting to perpetually, quote, expand, I mean, is Ukraine's NATO ambition now effectively dead in the water?
Well, if it comes to Trump, the answer is probably yes. But we have, as NATO, I mean, we have the commitment which was made in the 2024 ironically, Washington Summit Declaration, where it clearly says Ukraine's future is in NATO. Yeah. And we will continue to support Ukraine on its irreversible path to full Euro-Atlantic integration, including NATO membership. So, so that's the, if you wish, the acquis in NATO at a time that included, of course, the US. Not the current administration, but the predecessor. But still, this is the what has been agreed. And of course, on the Ukrainian side, it's even in their constitution. Yeah? So, but in many ways, I mean, all this just underlines, reinforces the ever more urgent need of Europeans to develop their own strategy, be this for Ukraine or be this for European strategic sovereignty.
And let's talk about that sort of rallying of the far right that you indicated earlier on, because looking at this document, on one hand we have the line here, enabling Europe to stand on its own feet. On the other we have, and I quote again, cultivating resistance to Europe's current trajectory. So is Washington trying to have its cake and eat it too, both give orders and give up responsibility?
Yeah, I think that's a fair description. I mean, I think in essence the US wants to make Europe a kind of mini MAGA area. Yeah. So in many ways, if you read this document, I mean, it seems to be inspired from J.D. Vance's speech at the Munich Security Conference, and ironically, I mean, the only area where this document sees a threat to democracy is in Europe. Yeah, I mean, this is bordering absurd. Yeah, so then, I mean, it also refers to Europe to further curb migration from Muslim majority and eventually so patriotic push to overturn the what they perceive as countries then being no longer European. It echoes to some extent this sort of racist great replacement conspiracy theory. Yeah? And then it culminates in basically saying that the biggest threat to Europe is of civilizational nature or civilizational erasure even, and that's even more existential according to them than the insufficient military spending and economic stagnation. So all in all, I think what we are seeing here is a MAGA blueprint for Europe, and Trump wants to bond with his right-wing counterparts wherever they are, in order to turn Europe into a mini MAGA.
Well, earlier this year, I was in Munich when Vice President J.D. Vance, as you rightly point out, admonished leaders for refusing to work with parties like Germany's AfD. Now we have an American security strategy that has become a call to arms, if you like, for the European continent to resist, and is, of course, warning of civilizational erasure, as you hinted at there. Is this crossing the line, the red line potentially, of blatant political and foreign interference in action?
Well, I think there have already been the first voices out there, including the German foreign minister saying, "Well, we don't need this advice." Yeah, so I will see whether others will make similar lines. The Commission has so far not spoken up. I mean, they are studying the document, but I could well imagine that also France and others will say, "Well, mind your own business." I mean, and how Europe deals with right-wing extremism, open speech, and the likes is European matter and not the US concern.
Some say this document harks back to the 19th century Monroe Doctrine, which of course warned against global interference in America's backyard. What is America's end game here? What does Donald Trump want for his country?
Well, I mean, to me, this reads like re-establishing a sphere of interest or sphere of influence, and that in itself, of course, will be of great joy to Vladimir Putin, because it will justify his own way of establishing spheres of interest. Yeah? So, but I also expect that this heavy focus, which is in the document of the revoked or reanimated Monroe Doctrine, that will probably also trigger a lot of pushback from Latin America, yeah? Because they will see this as, again, U.S. overreach and hegemony, especially now in light of the recent U.S. strikes on presumed drug boats where they are killing crew members. That critique is already rising. And there are many out there saying, I think with good justification, that what the US is doing there is breaking international law, is illegal.
And I guess the question is also not just what America's end game is, but how does the world order pivot, read Europe, when Washington says, we don't like this world order anymore?
Yeah, I mean, Europe in this strategy is considered not even secondary but tertiary. Yeah? I mean, it focuses first on the Western Hemisphere, then on Asia, and then is in the third place comes Europe. But in my mind, I mean, it clearly shows that Donald Trump has driven a wedge and a permanent wedge, if you ask me, between European and US security. And I don't see that they will be coming back. So again, we as Europeans need to take our destiny in our own hands, believe in our own strengths, stick together, because every country otherwise is much too small, and develop our own plan for our security and defense, and also develop our own peace plan for Ukraine, because what the US is developing there is clearly not a peace plan.
Now, we're running out of time, but there's also a specific mention of the, quote, healthy Central, Eastern and Southern European countries and the plan for commercial ties, weapons sales, political collaboration. How do you read into this? Because is America trying to go over the head of Western Europe to deepen ties with your Viktor Orbáns of this world, but also woo the likes of Poland, for example, to become perhaps some kind of a continental mouthpiece?
Yeah, no, I think the whole gist is that the strategy is emphasizing bilateralism. I mean, it talks about the primacy of the individual nation. It's condescending on multilateralism and international organizations, which it refers to as being intrusive and similar. So, and that, of course, is immediately applicable to the European Union, which it tries to weaken, but also to split. And the reference to countries in Central Eastern Europe is clearly a way of undermining European unity. Yeah. And then clearly, I mean, the reference also to keep buying American at the same time is actually, misleading, to put it mildly, because what happened in the past years, according to data from CIPRI, is actually that Europe has increased its spending in US weapons and not decreased. So there's nothing from the US side to complain about when it comes to buying American.
And very briefly, I want to end with a simple question when it comes to NATO. Is the transatlantic alliance in a state of collapse, or has it already collapsed as we know it?
Well, in a state of collapse, not yet, because I mean, clearly it's still operational, if you wish. But on a strategic level, it is in an existential crisis, because topics like Russia, Ukraine, European sovereignty, China, all these necessary strategic discussions can no longer happen in NATO with a US which is performing the way it is performing.
Galinda Nehus, former NATO Deputy Director for Defence and Security Cooperation. Thank you so much for your time, as always.
My pleasure.
And that's all for World News tonight. Do stay with us here on TVP World for more. I'm Aaron Darman. Good night.